Hi, Dr. Reagan Robertson, CCO of Productive Dentist Academy here, and I have a question for you. Are you finding it hard to get your team aligned to your vision, but you know you deserve growth just like everybody else? That's why we've created the PDA Productivity Workshop. For nearly 20 years, PDA workshops have helped dentists just like you align their teams, get control of scheduling, and create productive practices that they love walking into every day. Just imagine how you will feel when you know your schedule is productive, your systems are humming, and your team is aligned to your vision. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. We can help. The demand for these workshops is so high that our March 2023 workshop is completely sold out. But there are still seats available for the only remaining workshop in September 2023. Visit productivedentist.com/workshop. That's productivedentist.com/workshop to secure your seats now.
Welcome to the Everyday Practices Podcast. I'm Reagan Robertson, and my co-host, Dr. Chad Johnson, and I are on a mission to share the stories of everyday dentists who generate extraordinary results using practical, proven methods you can take right into your own dental practice. If you're ready to elevate patient care and produce results that are anything but ordinary, buckle up and listen in. Reagan Robertson here, host of Everyday Practices Dental Podcast. Dr. Chad Johnson and I believe you deserve tips you can use to grow your practice, and that's why we began this podcast. Last year, we were honored to win the Best Podcast of 2021 award by dentalpodcast.org, and we are so excited to announce that we have been nominated again. If you have found value in hearing our podcast, we would sure appreciate your vote. Head on over to www.dentalpodcast.org to vote for Everyday Practices Dental Podcast so others have the chance to learn about us. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get to our latest episode.
Hey, everybody, this is Chad Johnson. I'm here with our PDA alumnus Paul Etchison for our Everyday Practices Dental Podcast here in early January 2023. Dr. Paul, how are you, buddy? It's been a while.
I'm good, man. How you doing, Chad?
I'm doing well. So thanks for coming on. We have kind of shortened up our episodes to where we're cutting to the chase. I wanted to get you on to talk about your new book because your first book we had talked about on your, just a little bit on your podcast, but then also on our podcast. In your podcast name, just so everyone knows, Dental Podcast Hero or Dental Practice Hero.
Dental Practice Heroes podcast.
Yes. And so the first book I thought was gold. And I think I told you privately, I was just like, that's totally a story brand, book, because I was just like, the way that you're structuring that, I was just like, there's a lot of elements to that. And so kudos to you. I really like him too, when he, introduces those ideas, and you did a fantastic job of entering that into your book. So you thought, I'm going to write book number 2. Yes. When did that start in your brain, and how did it come to fruition?
Well, I think after the first one, and it was well received, it was something that I wrote before I started the podcast. It was kind of came out at the same time as I started the podcast. And, it's just like anything. Sometimes I do coaching, and I've had coaching clients, they say to me, I'll tell them stories, and they go, I can't believe you're still having these issues at your practice. I'm like, man, it never gets to a point where you don't have issues. You keep learning along the way.
Yep.
And then after, 4 or 5 years of interviewing guests and our practice going from 5 operatories to 11 operatories, doubling in revenue, running a large team of over 40 employees, you learned a lot. I learned a lot more. So I wanted to write another book that was kind of focused on more so on the premise of the book is I want people to get down to 3 days clinical. And this was something that kind of happened to me by happenstance, I wanted to get out of the clinical because I was getting burnt out, and it was getting really hard to manage this large team. But what I noticed is as I pulled myself out clinical, the practice started running a lot better, and I started making more money. I started taking home more at the end of the year. And it was that I was dedicating time towards running the practice versus seeing patients all the time.
Yeah.
So the book is about how to get yourself to 3 days, because at the bare minimum, it's just life is better if you're not seeing patients over 3 days a week. I mean, it's better at 2 days.
It's taxing enough. And yes. I think you're in a good crowd of, the people that are listening to this are going to understand, because they're likely dentists and they get that. The way I see it, there's 2 kinds of burnout, and I want you to talk on this, but One kind of burnout is because you're frustrated that everything's sucking. The other kind of burnout is when you start to figure out how to be so awesome and like you're actually killing it. And then you can get burnout because you're like, well, why not just drink from a fire hydrant and, totally like, let's kill it. Yeah. But I don't know if you remember too, Johnny Shanks, like he basically figured out how to be killing it. And then I think he was getting to the point where he was like, now I'm burnt out, yeah. And the poor guy, but that's an awesome problem to have. Did you run across that?
Well, I think it's a good problem to have, like you mentioned, because anytime you're getting at these capacity points, as I call them in my book, when you reach a point where there's something needs to change, you're feeling that stress, it's a good problem to have because that means you can pivot and try to do something new and take the practice to a new level. For me, it was that I think when I look back, is that my team was growing, my team was getting larger, 40 plus employees, and I was still seeing patients a lot. And there was so much I wanted to do. There was so many like hygienists I wanted to sit down and just work on verbiage with. I wanted to sit down at the front desk and be like, how can we make things run smoother? And I wanted to do these things and I was excited to do them. I enjoyed doing that sort of stuff. But it was like I had to come in and see patients and I wanted to get to this stuff, but I had to see more patients. And then a patient calls and then I have to stay late. And then I got to come in my off day and I should be working on training the team and I got to see more patients. And it just gave me this like really bad bitterness towards
well, you're practice. Doing two jobs.
Yeah, I was doing two jobs and I was really excited to do the business aspect of it, but I wasn't that excited for the dentistry anymore. And not that I hate dentistry. I don't. No. I still practice dentistry, but it was like I didn't have enough time to do it. And then what started to happen is I was like, okay, you know what? Mondays, I'm not seeing patients. I'm just coming in, I'm working on the business. And that worked for like 3 weeks. And then I'd be there. They'd be like, hey, this patient called. Can you see him? You're here anyway. Can't you see him?
Yeah.
There's a recall patient here. They really want you to do your exam. Can you see him? And I just was like, yeah, I'm here. What the heck not? And then before I knew it, I'd have a patient on the schedule on a Monday. And then this front desk would see I had another patient. They were like, you know what? And then they got booked for 5 hours. And I'm just, dude, like, why? So I stopped coming in on Mondays. I'm like, I can't do it. Like,
right.
So it was this transition that I kind of had to figure out on my own is how do I get the practice to run without me? How do I empower my leads more? But then also, how do I set the boundaries on what I'm willing to do to see patients? Because there was this critical turning point when we were having a meeting as a team. And because some patients would be super upset. Man, I was seeing Dr. Etch forever. What do you mean I can't see him for another 6 months? That's BS. And finally, I just said, you know what? I'm not doing fillings anymore. I'm not doing crowns anymore. I only want to do ortho. I only want to do cosmetic work. That's all I want to do. And if it's not that, they have to see somebody else. And I told the team, I said, hey, I know patients get upset with this. If it's a deal breaker that I have to do their dentistry for them to stay patients here, you can offer them to send their records somewhere else because that's the point I'm at. And that was this critical turning point where they were like, really? You'd lose a patient over it? And I just said, if that's a deal breaker for the patient, then we're not a good match as a practice doctor-patient relationship anymore. And that was like where things started changing, where they started diverting towards my associates. Like, you know what? He doesn't do that procedure anymore. And you know what's funny about it is nobody left. I mean, I'm sure somebody left, but sure. They all stayed in the practice. Yeah. They were upset with it, but they wanted to keep their hygiene.
Well, it's a game of chicken, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of what it was.
Battle of the wills.
But it was amazing that I had this big roadblock in my mind that I can't do this. And then I just did it because I couldn't handle it anymore. And that was when I really started seeing like, wow, like now the energy I'm putting into the practice is really, it's taking the practice to a new level. And it was also part of me looking at, what did I take home last year? And then I say, okay, well, look at how much dentistry I have produced. If I paid myself 30% of my production, how much of that take home was because of the production? And how much was because I own the office? And it was like 15% of my take home was just doing dentistry and 85% was me running the office. Right. And I was spending 80% of my time there, maybe more, doing dentistry. So it was like I needed to spend more time running the office. And I think solo practitioner, you got to do both. I mean, you're the only one there. But once you start having more of an associate model, I think your time becomes much more valuable to be the leader, to be the trainer, to help collaborate, solutions for problems that you're having, to talk to your team and et cetera. And because that's where I think you see the big growth. And it's hard to grow when you're trying to do both things at once.
So you've got some docs though, that aren't even paying them, like doc owners that aren't even paying themselves 30%. And so I just want to slow down, to make sure that people get this. Lately, I've been wondering if the dentist owner is so much of a martyr that we don't understand. We should be paid in two capacities for the two jobs we're paid,
Right.
as the administrator / owner and as the clinician. So when you're drilling, you should pay yourself as an associate, whether it's 20%, 35%, whatever your going rate for your area or your arbitrary number, whatever you want that to be. But let's just, middle of the road for today, something like 30%. And then, like you're looking at taking home, 10% of the business's profit, maybe 15. And if you're killing it, maybe 20%. But I even just want, so add that together, you've got 30%, 15%. So 45% of the practice with a 55% overhead, which is also tight to do, but like that, hypothetically, you should be paying yourself at that rate. And yet I don't know, I've heard of like some consultants say that, some dentists are working for less than their hygienist. And so in other words, they're not even paying themselves 10% as the clinical dentist, let alone 10% as the owner. So how would that look for them? Like if they were to baby step, and not to give away all the secrets to your book, because the problem is there's such a large span of dentists, some people that are on the cusp, well, pun intended, of being able to implement what you're talking about. That being, the 3-day work week, that's the subtitle of your book.
Yeah.
And giving that the life you want. But then there's some people that kind of need to put in some hard work administratively. You did that. And then you got, that goes back to the two burnouts, you're no good, relatively speaking, at the business aspect. And so then you've got to kill it at dentistry to even make a buck, but you also then need to work administratively. Once you get the administrative part down, that might be the point where people can pick up and start to go, okay, now in order to protect the burnout, I should earn the life that I want by cutting back and almost creating scarcity. There was a whole lot at you right there, but what were your thoughts when you heard all that?
Yeah. So, the first thing is that when you're a solo owner, and I did the same thing, I had no idea how much it would be to pay myself as an associate, because you pay the payroll. And then at the end of the month, you take a distribution. You go, here's my operating reserve. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to empty the checking account into my own and leave maybe, 40, 50K into there, or whatever people do for their operating reserve. But it's like, you don't know how much of that is from the dentistry and how much is, for running the business, because you're just taking what's left over. So if you looked at it from a aspect of saying, what would this be for dentistry if I paid myself 30%? Because as you mentioned, that's just a nice average. Then you get to see how much of that extra money you take home is the business owner profit. And when you see that, then you can say, well, I produced $1 million with my own hands last year. And this is what I made. If I made $300,000 on that $1 million, because I paid myself 30%. If I had an associate come in and produce $1 million, they'd get paid that $300,000. But whatever's left, I would still get, and I didn't even have to pick up a handpiece. And I'm not saying you should cut out clinical completely. I think it should be something you dial down slowly. But if someone's kind of looking at this and saying, like, what do I do? How do I get myself down? My premise in the book is that there's only really 6 big things that we have to do in a practice, and every decision should be kind of guided by these things. And we have to increase 4 things. We have to increase new patients. We have to increase the dollars spent per patient. We have to increase our scheduling and our clinical efficiency, more or less just how fast we do things. And we have to increase our collection percentage. Those are only 4 things that we got to do. Now, those are broad categories. All the while decreasing the 2 things, decreasing how many patients we lose due to attrition or people going to another office, and decreasing our write-offs via insurance participation. So it's like, that makes it sound really dumbed down and easy, but there's a lot of elements that go into that. Because as you know, and Chad, as a PDA doc, it's all dollar per hour. What is the office doing per hour? And, how can we do more and less? And I always say, when you're going from 4 or 5 days to 3 days, it's not that you're not going to do less. You're doing the exact same, if not more, in 3 days, but you're getting more focused on that you can do it. And I've had a number of coaching clients, this is what people reach out to me for, is going from 4 to 3 days. And I haven't had a single one that's said, man, I'm making less money. Because I think what we don't realize is that we've got so many gaps in our schedule and so many little inefficiencies. And when we cut it down to 3 days and we just get more efficient, it's like nothing changes. But then the greedy guy wants to go, well, if I could do that in 3 days, what could I do in 4? And it's like, no, that's not the idea. You use that 4th day to run everything, or you just go golfing, whatever you want. You spend more time with your family. I mean, I owned my practice for 10 years and a little over 10 years now. And I would say the first 6 of them, man, is like my oldest was young. I missed a lot of that. I was focused on the practice. I was thinking about it all the time, talking about it all the time. It was like I lived and went to sleep and woke up and started thinking about it.
Sure.
And to the detriment of my family and my wife. And in retrospect, I could see that now, but it's something that I've reached this point where I'm like, what am I really doing this for? What am I living for? And you should be doing the things that you enjoy. You should be having day after day where you're spending a lot of time doing things that bring you joy rather than stuff that feels like a grind. Yep. If anything feels like a grind, you got to figure out, why does this feel like such a grind, and do something about it. Because I mean, as we know, we don't know when our clock's going to be up. It could be tomorrow. It could be 20 years from now, but we've got to live life on our terms. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about being a dentist and a dental practice owner, is we can do that. And over the course of my career, I've had so many things that, let's collect before the patient schedules. Oh, they won't go for that. I'm going to take off 16 weeks a year. Well, that's not going to be okay. Patients are going to be upset. I'm not checking hygiene anymore. I'm not seeing new patients anymore. And every one of these things, like, my initial reaction was, I can't do that at my practice, but I could. And I did. And it was fine. And so I would just say, anyone who's a practice owner, look at what you're doing at your practice, look at what you like, what you dislike, and start moving to spend more time doing things you like. There's always a solution for this. There's a way to make this work. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about dentistry, is that we've got this flexibility, and there's nothing that says you can't just show up one day a week. Now, do you need some associates if you're going to do one day a week? Yeah, probably. I mean,
Probably.
Your patients will call and be like, hey, can I get in? They're like, well, we just saw you yesterday. You need a bite adjustment.
We'll see you in October.
6 days.
It's
Yeah,
January, right.
Yeah. So, I mean, but there's a way to make it work, and you can bring on an associate. They're not going to be you 100%, and that's okay. They're going to be good. The patients are going to like them. And as long as you're attentive and calibrating and providing mentorship, you can have a good associate that can provide nicely for your patients. My practice is doing, almost 4 times as much as it was as me as a solo provider. And wow. I don't think we're doing bad dentistry. I think we're helping 4 times more people. We're providing 4 times more value. Right. So there is nothing wrong with running that kind of practice. It's not a crown mill. It's not about volume. It's about taking great care of people within the boundary of ethics. We're not doing anything unethical.
Yeah.
It's just a larger practice that's a little bit more efficient and has a lot more volume than most practices are used to.
Right. Yeah. I thought of this when you were talking about going from 4 days to 3 days. I gave my daughter, a while to clean up her room, and I go in and find that she's just playing, when she should have been picking up. And that sometimes I think, like, if it's like, man, I kind of had a busy day. It's like, were you actually busy cleaning up problems, or were you just kind of playing? Yeah. And because it's amazing how there are some days that flow and they're more financially lucrative and productive than the slow days. And that's so weird, but I'm so tired on a slow day.
Yeah. Me too. Like, I want to go. I want to be busy. And, but if you mentioned like playing around, there's so many dentists like us that we sit there and we play office. We're doing the payroll. We're doing the bookkeeping. We're scanning invoices. We're paying vendors. We're paying bills. And I mean, these are all things that we can just delegate. There's this a great book called Clockwork by Mike Michaelowitz, and it talks about the queen bee role and says, that queen bee lays eggs. All she does all day is she lays eggs, the hive grows. But then what if she gets interrupted by bees that are saying, hey, we want to go check out this pollen. We want to go over here. We want to do this. And she's just trying to lay her eggs. Like, leave me alone. I just got to lay my eggs. That's my job here. And that's what we do as owners. We should be providing leadership, providing guidance, fostering collaboration with team members, but we get pulled in all these directions. And then we have all this busy stuff we do, like the payroll that we could be delegating to someone else. And so it's like, a lot of the 3-day stuff is making investments in your time by putting extra time in training other people how to do things that you don't want to do anymore. And if a lot of us graduate, we say, I want to make a great income as a dentist. You can't make a great income as a dentist if you're doing administrative work that somebody would do for $20 an hour. You know, you're going to get paid what the value provides.
Right.
So it's like, let's get these things off of our plate and delegate them to team members. And you can go all the way to just delegating leadership. You can bring that all the way up to the chain, so where you practically do nothing. I mean, my goal is one day I want to show up at my practice and people be like, who is that? Who is that person? I'm like, that's
right.
someone, you know, like I'm not there yet, but it sometimes it feels like that. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I'll walk in the practice and I'll see somebody I don't recognize. I'm like, oh, hey, I'm Paul Etchison. What's your name? When did you start? And like, oh, yeah, I just started last week. I'm like, oh, cool. You know, it's like,
or when it gets to the point where like 10 years from now, they're like, I started 3 months ago. And you're like, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, you know, what's funny is I took 2 weeks off and I went in, and I think I was there for 2 weeks. And then I asked my assistant lead, I'm like, I won't say her name, but I'm like, hey, where's that girl? I haven't seen her once. She's like, oh, she quit. And I'm like, oh, okay. I did. I guess we're down one. All right. Didn't even notice, you know, it's like you get stuck in your little bubble, but it's like, that's the bubble I want to be in right now. I'm liking this bubble. Yeah.
So someone picks this book up. Should this be a continuation of Dental Practice Hero?
Mm-hmm. Well, good question. Cause I've been getting on podcasts and talking about it. And what I'm realizing is that my first book is now being bought at about the same rate as my second book. Cause I think people feel like the second book does say the sequel, but it is a standalone book. And personally, I think if you're going to just buy one, I really like the second book better. Mm-hmm. And it's because it's got all those years of me being a podcast host, interviewing people.
Yes.
Because, you know, like when you interview people, like sometimes it's like, oh, I'm just asking the questions for a listener. No, I'm getting a lot out of this too. Like a lot of times I'm asking questions that are pertinent to my situation and my practice. And it's a higher level in this second book. And I think it has, the first book was more about generally, how do we run a great practice? How do we have a great team? The second book is more about what is the mindset and the stuff that I need to bring as a leader to lead these people to our goals. And then it's kind of nuts and bolts, step by step. What do we figure out? How do we set the goals? And how do we work on all these little things that can get us to the goal of 3 days a week? And it doesn't matter if you're a solo provider, if you're a multi-doc office, if you're multi-practice, all the principles are the same. We're just trying to run the most efficient practice possible with the time that we have there. And it gives you all these different ways you can go about it. Like I would think we were talking before we hit record here. I'm down to just 4 half days a week or 4 half days a month now. And I'm mostly just doing band and bracket on kids. That is what I like to do. I have 4 columns of ortho on Tuesday nights for 5.5 hours. And I love that. That is where I go in and I have a really good time and I hang out with my team. And I've had some times this year, like I took 3 weeks off not too long ago. And there is a limit to how little dentistry you would do or how little you have to do. I mean, I have a lot I do with like real estate and apartment buildings, as well as having the podcast and stuff like that. But I had that weeks where I had nothing to do, and that's not a good place to be either. That pendulum can swing the other way where you're like, whoa, I think I want to go work more, which is, it's strange. I would have never thought that when I was at 4 days a week.
But tell me, because I'm not there. I mean, is that refreshing at that point
Well, it is, because then you almost have a different mindset going into it, because you've realized that I'm going to do this because I want to do this. And
yes.
It's like that old thing, like if you're upset about doing something, say, well, I get to do it instead of I have to do it. But it's almost like I had to go that full circle to say, you know what? I don't want to not practice. I want to be there to some extent. Now, do I want to feel handcuffed by it and be there all the time and have everyone texting me when I'm off about issues and arguments between people? No, absolutely not. I don't want to do that anymore.
Sure. But that's where systems come in place.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got systems and the leadership team that takes care of all that stuff now, to where I just go in there and I have fun. And on my ortho nights, you see 4 columns, we'll see 30 something people. And it's a lot of like assistant driven. And I'll just be up at the front desk, just kind of talking and just seeing how people are doing. And and I enjoy it. Whereas before, I would never go to the front desk and talk to people because I got too much stuff to do.
Yes.
I'm so busy. If I get 10 minutes in between patients, I got to be in my office, like working away at this like paperwork, getting back with patients, like shooting emails. And it's just such a better life quality thing for me now. And it's easy to say now that I'm here, but this was always available to me, my whole entire practice
when you
career.
chose.
It was when it was exactly. It was when I chose and I set out to do it. And that's why I would say, like, anything you think you can do, you definitely can do it. There's a way. You just have to kind of be more intentional and clear cut on what you want, and then figuring out solutions for those problems. So
interestingly, you know, we've got, I don't know if you've heard of Timothy Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek.
Yeah.
But like, that's almost within the dental realm, the dentist owner, so ridiculous. And I think the title is audacious in the first place. And that's cool if some people can do it. But like, for a dentist owner, it's like, well, okay, I don't know about that. I mean, technically you're about pulling that off, but
I'm close.
At least for clinical stuff. But, you know, so the cool thing is you've got a book that's a lot more tangible in helping people within our sphere of influence to be able to achieve it. Avoiding the burnout, growing the practice to what you want it, getting the systems in place, tracking those numbers, and then intentionally backing out so that way you're not the buttress that's holding the whole thing up.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, one thing that I will say is that I've had a leadership team for 5 years now, like, where I've had an assistant lead, I got my hygiene lead, you know, I got my office manager. And it wasn't until, and I'm not trying to pump the organization, but I partnered up with an organization with a DSO. And it wasn't until I sold some equity that I was able to take some risk out of it. And then and since I didn't have as much risk, if you would have asked me, how much do these leads do at the practice? Oh man, they do everything. All right. I thought I did very little until we shut down for COVID. When we shut down for COVID and I saw what it was like to do very little, I'm like, I do a lot. I handle a lot emotionally burden, psychological burden from this office. So when I came back from COVID, I said I was going to do things differently. That's what led to the partnership. And now, only owning a small piece of my practice, I was able to say, you know what, to my assistant, who's now my clinical lead, anything that happens at the practice, I trust you. Just take care of it. You know what I would do. And even if you do something I wouldn't do, I'm still going to back you up. Right. And I came in one time and I said to her, I said, man, it just feels like nobody's arguing at the practice. Everything's going really well. Like, this is crazy. Like, what's changed? And she goes, oh, there's still a ton of stuff happening at the practice. But she's like, we got it under control. Do you want to know about it? And that was the first time I said, no, I don't want to know about it. Yeah. And before, at 100% ownership, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I got to know, like, I got to fix this. Of course. And it took me taking off the micromanaging, not that I was micromanaging, but
it sometimes can lean that way.
Right. I had my head in everything. I was like, who's arguing? I got to sit them down. I got to talk to both of them. Yep. And when I got out of that, I said, hey, can you do this? Like, can you meet with people? Can you build them up? Can you appreciate them? Can you show gratitude for them? Can you listen to their issues and come up with solutions with them? And they said, yeah, of course we could do this. And they've been doing such a good job. The practice has never run better. And me emotionally have never felt better. Like, this burden has been lifted. In the mechanics of it, I could have done this as a 100% owner. I just had to kind of change my mindset. But it took me selling equity to be able to do that. I'm not, but you don't have to sell equity to do this. You can do this now as a 100% owner. You just have to trust. And I wish I could have done this way earlier in my career, because I think I would have been a much more less miserable person for those times when it was like bad. You know what I mean? So
because like you alluded to the weight of the problems being on your shoulder, you know, whether it be practice debt, HR issues, interpersonally, patient issues, a plumbing issue, you know, little stuff all adds up, big stuff adds up. Yeah.
Well, it's like you mentioned a plumbing issue. I mean, I remember one time back in the day, early in our practice, you know, one of the bathrooms, the toilet just wouldn't flush anymore. It was just clogged and you couldn't get it unclogged, and it would just fill up to the brim and it'd take like 2 hours to go down. And my solution, I was so busy, was just put a sign on the freaking door and shut it. I'll call a plumber when I can. Right. And then it was like 3 weeks later, and one of my assistants is like, do you want me to call a plumber? I'm like, please just find a plumber and call him. And then it got done. But it was like, yeah, why couldn't someone else just do this? Like, I was just like, I gotta sit down. I got to do that. Right. And you don't have to do that. Your team can do this. Like, they want that responsibility. They want that autonomy. They want to feel like they're contributing something, and they will work. Maybe they're not going to be as invested mentally as you, but they'll get pretty damn close. Or
sadly, sometimes they'll do better.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of how it's happening right now. I think in my practice, I think it's better than when I was doing it. It really
and you
is.
pick the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. True.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, if we get to 1 million copies sold, will you finally sign my copy?
Yeah. Well, do you think we could get that done this week? Maybe
This week.
Do you have 1 million people listener reach on your podcast?
I guarantee I have at least 3, but because there's 3 million dentists in America, right?
Yeah. And they all listen.
I wonder what the dentist number is at. I don't know if we're at like 250 or something like that, 250,000 dentists in America or something. So
yeah, right.
Hopefully you can, sell at least 200,000.
I'd say those 250,000. I mean, it's got to be what 3-4% listen to podcasts. Most of the
Absolutely.
People, most of the people don't care, But that's what's cool about when you go to like somewhere where it's people. Whenever something's promoted on a podcast, or I always think like Voices of Dentistry, where it's a podcasting conference. It's just really cool because the people that listen to podcasts are a different breed of dentists.
Yep.
Like
you know what else I'm curious about is if anyone's listening to this specific episode, drop a line to me, chad@productivedentist.com. Let me know if you actually are listening to this faster than 1.0, because one of my unwritten goals is that the content goes quick paced enough that people don't fast forward me, because I'm an Audible guy and I listen anywhere from 1.3 to 1.8. And so like, but I'm just like, my mind goes so fast, and you've been talking at such a clip. I'm just like, if anyone's listening to this at 1.5, kudos to them, because I just don't know how they could, but maybe it's possible. I just don't think of myself as a 1.5 kind of listener kind of guy when I'm on the giving the podcast. So yeah. I need to slow down sometimes. I think I talk too fast. No, this was gold. Well, brother, best wishes with your book. It's been out since the new year, right?
Yeah, since a little bit before the new year.
A little bit before the new year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing where you're going from there, because it's not like you're going to be quitting anytime soon. So I'm proud of you.
Nope.
I'm proud of what you've done for your clients and your community and your office. It's really cool to hear that kind of stuff. I appreciate you joining us for Everyday Practices Dental Podcast, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Chad.
You want to give a shout out one more time for your podcast?
Oh yeah. Dental Practice Heroes podcast. Check it out. It's on where people listen to podcasts, wherever you go, So
that's right.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Thanks, Dr. Paul. We'll talk soon. And that's the end of the episode, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Everyday Practices Podcast. Chad and I are here every week thanks to our community of listeners just like you, and we'd love your help. It would mean the world if you can help spread the word by sharing this episode with a fellow dentist and leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. Do you have an extraordinary story you'd like to share, or feedback on how we can make this podcast even more awesome? Drop us an email at podcast@productivedentist.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts from Productive Dentist Academy at productivedentist.com/podcasts. See you next week.